Richard's bachelor lifestyle takes a turn when his much younger girlfriend, Kate, gets pregnant. Amid disputes with Kate and financial struggles, he starts getting closer to her sister, Olivia. Richard apologizes to his son, Jake, for ruining everything. He loves Jake and thinks what they have is special. To give a proper explanation, he begins the story from where it all started. Richard grows up in a party house and witnesses a dysfunctional marriage. After school, he likes to attend lectures in the college that belongs his dad, Gordon. Richard watches as Gordon takes a stand against the faculty. He dares to teach his students about Byron, who he thinks defined the Romantic Age. Gordon brags about how Byron didn't follow any rules. Everyone loves Gordon for hating authority, and Richard grows up wanting to be exactly like him. When Richard becomes a poetry professor at Cambridge, he starts teaching his students with the same kind of aggression. His lectures are all about witty quotes and helping students forget theory. He starts sleeping with one of his, Kate, who thinks her dad will love him. They have been dating for 6 months, and Kate asks him to be there on time. Richard watches as Olivia breaks her heel while talking to Sal on the phone. She also drops her phone in the gutter by mistake and asks the doorman to not take it out. Richard checks her out as she sits next to him and asks what they're doing with her phone. Olivia wants to cut off from the world and hopes they don't get it out. She wants to live on an island alone and populate it with people she likes. Richard thinks the nice people will soon turn on her, and she'll have to move to another island. He feels the best solution is to get along with everyone. When Olivia asks why he's alone on a Saturday night, he flirts with her. When she refers to him as a handsome stranger, he comes closer and quotes Shakespeare. The doorman brings her phone back, and Olivia doesn't get why people want to help so much. She still feels it's nice to be looked after, but wonders what happened to chivalry. Richard thinks guys open doors for women to check out their behind. Richard continues to flirt with her and is about to kiss her. Kate is excited to see Olivia, who is her half-sister. Olivia came by to surprise Kate when she heard their dad was meeting her there. Kate explains that her dad kept running off from a hotel they were staying at, claiming he had meetings. Her mom decided to chase him one day and found him at the beach with Olivia and her mother. They all realized he was leading a double life. Olivia took Kate aside to process what happened. They realized they wanted to be sisters and made a pact to never keep secrets with each other. Olivia keeps glaring at Richard when she stresses on how they share everything. Olivia's expressions change when Kate asks her about Alan Sloane, a romance writer. Olivia edits his books, and Kate thinks she is madly in love with him. When Richard makes fun of that, Olivia taunts him for sleeping with his. When Richard offers them his steak while still flirting with Olivia, she decides to be honest about Richard. She feels Kate is the perfect catch for him because she's about to graduate. She thinks Richard has just charmed her because Kate was looking for a present father figure. She feels Kate is too young to see how Richard is also a womanizer like their dad. Kate reminds Olivia she also ran off with Anwar. Olivia claims that was only because they thought she was pregnant. Kate admits she is pregnant with Richard's baby too. She feels bad for breaking the news like this, but Richard pretends everything is fine. He leaves to get some air, and Kate follows him. She feels bad for suddenly informing him about this and understands that he needs time. Kate is moving to Los Angeles for a job at a venture capital firm and feels Richard will love teaching there too. She thinks he will be a great dad, but he pukes right after he heads out of the hotel. Richard comes to meet Gordon and Joan. Gordon wants to know if he's still with the American girl. Richard thinks she's beautiful and ambitious, but Gordon seems to have a problem with women trying to achieve something. He is worried about Richard's career too, because he was the head of the department by his age. Richard feels Gordon is always cribbing about something. He asks why he married his mother, because his 4 marriages make him question things. Gordon remembers his mother fed and pleasured him. Richard thinks factors like friendship and wanting to start a family should also count. Gordon is worried Richard has fallen for Kate and rants about how American women easily get fat. He goes on to describe how superficial he thinks American women are. He feels Richard shouldn't fall for that as an Englishman. Richard bangs the door on him and heads to the university to meet Kate. He commits to her and the baby and agrees to go to Los Angeles with her. When Jake is born, Richard is a proud father. They shift to a grand house Kate's absent father bought for her out of the guilt. Richard starts teaching in Los Angeles with the same kind of enthusiasm, but none of his students are interested. He's teaching at the city college till he finds something concrete with the University of Los Angeles. His colleague, Angela, reminds him to suck up to the faculty more to get the job. Richard is trying to teach Jake how to abuse the English way and drops his keys. Jake calls out to his mom as Kate is leaving with another man. Richard thinks Jake is just remembering her and feels she must be at work. Kate asks Brian to pull over so they can listen to Richard's voice message. He describes how Jake pointed at an oversized truck and remembered her. Olivia calls at their home when she's in New York with Alan. She asks for Kate, but Richard thinks she's still banking. Olivia wants to share some big news with Kate, who also walks through the door and starts explaining herself. While Olivia informs Richard that she's marrying Alan, Kate claims she's in love with someone else. Kate takes the phone from him and asks to call Olivia back later. Kate claims she was very young when she assumed she loved Richard and was working through daddy issues. She admits Richard has been a great father and always did the right thing. But she thinks Richard never loved her like Brian from Office does. He likes to talk about startups and acquisitions with her, which Richard finds too boring. Richard asks her to leave him if she wants, but he refuses to leave Jake. Richard spends the next 2 years in Kate's pool house so Jake can be closer to him. Jake wants to come over when Richard's student, Misty, is in the pool house. Richard makes her leave and claims to Jake that she was a friend. Jake finds underwear on the staircase. Richard explains that girls take it off because it's uncomfortable. In the present, Richard explains how everything changed last week. Richard is sitting in his office when Misty comes to submit a paper and flirt with him. Angela taunts him for sleeping with her too. Professor Pickard asks Richard about the application he submitted to the university. He invites Richard to a soiree where the faculty members will be present. He asks Richard to butter them up if he wants a place there. Alan is discussing another writer when Olivia is getting checked at the gynae so they can have a baby. He flirts with a nurse who wants his autograph, so Olivia throws her phone at him. Jake thinks he's terrible at baseball, but Brian comes to teach him how to do it properly. Jake hits Richard in the head, but he claims to be fine. Kate reminds Richard about her 4-day conference with Brian in Atlanta. She gives him a schedule and asks him to take care of Jake. Olivia gets back home to find lingerie across the hall and catches Alan cheating on her. Brian comes to the pool house to give Richard a letter about his green card. Richard gets a final warning to show up with his spouse for the interview next week. If he doesn't, he is likely to get deported. After a visit to the dentist, Richard is given a medication he cannot use with alcohol, but he starts drinking right after taking it at Pickard's soiree. He is nervous and asks Angela to start praising him whenever needed. Pickard makes Richard taste his wife's cheese balls, which he throws when Pickard is not looking. He introduces Richard to the faculty and his colleagues at the university. Richard jokes about forgetting their names already, and one of them hands him another drink. A professor remembers attending a lecture Gordon delivered, and they all start talking at the same time about different things. Pickard informs him that the faculty has gone over his application again. Richard keeps sipping his drink while ranting to a woman about Pickard's yapping. Pickard wants to know why he thinks the romantics are relevant to today's students. He suggests Pickard should see him in action in his class and invites him on Thursday. When he realizes he was ranting about Pickard to his wife, he awkwardly leaves the party. He accidentally crashes Pickard's car and is unable to drive straight. He gets pulled up for drunk driving and starts acting funny. Kate bails him out, but gives him the silent treatment. Olivia informs them about Alan dumping her, and Richard jokes about going through a similar situation with Kate. Olivia has agreed to help Kate with Jake because she doesn't trust Richard to be responsible. Kate knows Jake loves Richard, but she is tired of getting calls from his immigration attorney. Kate asks him to get his life together if he wants her help so he can stay in the country. Gordon calls him to ask about Jake, but Richard gets offended when he addresses him as the little turd. Richard regrets picking his call and realizes he is late. He finally meets his immigration attorney, Ernesto. Ricard is down to his final warning, so they don't have any time to waste. He hasn't received a full-time job yet, too. Ernesto also thinks it's bad news he got arrested for Dewey recently. Richard is confident he can't get deported because Jake was born in the US and is a citizen. Ernesto shows him some parents who are about to get deported, even if their kid is a citizen. He asks Richard to join a recovery program and attend at least 10 court-mandated sessions for Dewey. Ernesto thinks his only chance is to do these sessions, get Kate to the interview, and get a full-time job very soon. Richard watches Olivia getting irritated when she reads about Alan's new relationship in a magazine. She keeps crashing the truck everywhere, so Richard offers to let her use his car. He doesn't seem confident about her driving, so he joins her to pick up Jake from school. She gets a call from her agent, Tim Prince, who feels bad about what happened with Alan. He also caught his wife cheating with his Tantra teacher, but he feels Olivia can easily become an author and has her chapter with him. He asks to go over it for a few days before giving her feedback, Olivia asks him to be gentle with her work and laughs out loud before keeping the call. Olivia thinks men have a switch that they flip on to jump from one woman to the next. She thinks men like Richard prefer to have sex than work things out. She thinks their horniness is a mask for them to hide behind. She wonders how he can teach the romantics without feeling anything. He claims he's feeling irritated by the call he heard with Tim. He thinks it sounded like she was having an orgasm. Olivia thinks men make more stupid noises and acts out how different kinds of men orgasm. When she's at the part about men who curse during sex, Jake thinks that sounds like Richard. Olivia gets embarrassed that his teachers, Anita and Chandler, also overheard her. But Richard drags her to the meeting. Anita points out how Jake asked for permission to curse. He gave examples of words he can use, so she took him to the principal's office. Chandler wonders how Jake is adjusting to his new living situation. Olivia clarifies that there has been a misunderstanding, and she and Richard are not together. She drops Richard off for his court-mandated meetings, but Richard claims he is stepping out for a bite. The moderator of the meeting, Wendy, introduces Cindy and Richard as the newest members of the group. While Cindy admits she is an alcoholic, Richard is the only one who claims he is not. He points out how it's perfectly normal to have a drink in the pub in England and thinks Americans take themselves too seriously. Richard tries to figure out how the romantics are relevant to his class, but they're all disinterested. One student is only taking the class to get his GPA up, and Stacy thinks the romantics don't impact her life. Tim loved Olivia's chapter and thinks she's smart and funny. He gives her some notes and suggests changing the name of the character to make it sexier. He still keeps praising her for being beautiful and talented. He thinks he can take her to the stars if she works with him. Ernesto calls Richard before the next meeting to let him know that an undercover federal agent is watching over him. Richard spots a man flashing his badge, so Ernesto asks him to just show good moral character in front of him. Richard pretends to be overly enthusiastic about Chad being sober for 13 days. Wendy asks Chad to share his journey, but Richard interrupts him. He claims he wants to change his earlier comments about the drinking habits of the English. He claims all of them are equal alcoholics and brags about being happily married and having an amazing son. He makes sure to point out that Jake was born in this country and loves it. Wendy asks why Richard would get behind a wheel drunk, knowing that he's responsible for Jake. Richard thinks on his feet and admits he is an alcoholic. As the meeting proceeds, he gets a call from Olivia and leaves in the middle. He comforts Jake when he's home and manages to calm him down. Jake had a bad dream about Kate and Richard not being in his life anymore. Richard hugs him and pretends he is blowing the bad dream out of his head. This calms Jake down and he gets happy again. Olivia is impressed with how well he handled it, and Richard tucks Jake into bed. Richard admits he and Kate won't work things out, but he assures Jake he can discuss anything with them. Olivia feels useless about not being able to calm Jake down. She feels that everyone, including Kate and Richard, have their life sorted, but she doesn't. Richard claims she did fine and thinks it's very different with your own kid. She is upset about ruining Soup too, but compliments Richard for being a great father. Richard finds it funny that women tend to adore him initially and then end up hating him. Olivia claims she already despised him at the beginning, but now she only loathes him sometimes. Richard comes to his window after work and watches as Olivia struggles to finally take off her wedding ring. Olivia has packed everything for Jake before his sleepover, and she sees him off with Richard. On their night off, Richard comes to Olivia's place with a bottle of wine. He finds Tim in a towel and assumes they were sleeping together. He watches as Olivia sees Tim off, and she brags about Tim staying till he got the job done. She knows what Richard is assuming and jokes about having Tim's friend. She soon clarifies that he only came for work and asks Richard to open the bottle of wine. Olivia feels overwhelmed by how many notes and judgment Tim gave her. She feels it's hard to have your own voice with so many opinions. She now feels the notes she gave Alan must have tortured him. Richard admits he always thought Alan was arrogant and could barely read his books, but he kept thinking about whether it's worse for Olivia to be married to him or edit his nonsense. Olivia is frustrated that he cheated on her with her gynecologist. She used to think Alan was coming to their appointments because he cared about them having a child. Richard thinks she's better off without him and starts praising her. He keeps flirting with her and comes closer to kiss her. Olivia panics when they hear Brian and Kate pulling up the next morning. She runs out of the room and jumps into the pool. She informs Kate that Jake is at a sleepover and Richard is sleeping in his own house. Kate finds it weird that but Olivia continues swimming. Richard acknowledges how Angela is his only female friend. He admits he slept with Olivia and it meant something for the first time. Angela feels he's trying to get himself deported. She knows Kate will find out about them, because she and Olivia talk about everything. Richard rushes home and finds Kate in the pool. She claims Olivia has told her everything about her book and how nice Richard was to her. Kate feels bad for being rude to Richard and thinks she shouldn't have threatened to not come for his green card meeting. Olivia is smoking behind the bushes and can't get over how amazing last night was. She wants to confess everything to Kate, but Richard holds her off. Gordon turns up at his place to ask why Richard has been ignoring his calls. Kate hugs him fresh out of the pool, and he doesn't seem to mind the wetness. Richard introduces Olivia too, and Kate offers to make him a room in the house. But Richard drags him to the guest house and feels Gordon should stay with him. He has apparently come to see Jake and gives him a model of a ship he never let Richard touch. Richard watches Olivia and Kate talking and tries to leave, but Gordon asks him to spend some time and starts playing with Jake. Olivia brings something for Jake's sand castle. Richard asks her to just hold off saying anything to Kate till his green card interview. Gordon watches as Richard whispers something in her ear and holds hands. Richard tries to take Jake to the bathroom, but Gordon asks him to pee off the pier. He feels Richard is boring, and Jake should listen to him instead. When Jake joins Gordon, Richard joins them too. Brian loves the joint Gordon made for him and tries to put on some music. Gordon feels Richard has ended up in paradise when people in England must be freezing. Richard is genuinely sorry that Joan left him, but Gordon makes a sarcastic comment. Richard remembers Gordon didn't give him any sympathy when Kate left him. Gordon reminds Richard that he warned him. Richard is irritated again and finally admits Joan left him because he's a misogynist and only cares about himself. Richard knows Gordon ruined his own life just to have fun and even managed to brainwash Richard initially. He asks Gordon to do him a favor and leave him alone. Richard finds Gordon's weed the next morning, but he has left. Richard asks if Wendy can sign his form that says he has attended 10 sessions. Wendy refuses to do it because she thinks he didn't mean anything he said. Richard finds Cindy outside and starts ranting to her about Wendy. He offers her a drink before his lecture, and even a joint. He claims he was joking with the joint because he doesn't want his son to find this at home. Richard asks his students to imagine Cambridge University in 1807, when Byron got a bear to class to defy rules. He notices they're all still ignoring him, so he asks them about how relevant romantics are to them. He admits they're not relevant because everyone is teaching them words and not the meaning. He admits he can tell them everything the romantics did, but the meaning behind it depends on the class. He feels the students have to find their own voices and compares them to the romantics. He asks them to get inspired by poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge, and then do their own thing. When he asks Stacy and Dwight to do what they want and follow their hearts, everyone finally gets engaged. Richard leaves a message for Gordon about how he ruined his audition lecture. He also teases Gordon for being thin-skinned and not letting him apologize before he left. Pickard has learned from the paint on Richard's Mustang that he hit his car, but he has come to personally congratulate Richard for getting accepted at the English department of the University of Los Angeles. Richard hugs him and is excited to share the news with Olivia. He feels good about the job and thinks they did the right thing by having sex. Olivia tries to stop him, but Richard keeps talking about how Kate shouldn't interfere since they have been separated for 2 years. He finds Brian sitting near the kitchen, and Kate also comes out. Kate is disappointed that Olivia hid things from her. She angrily asks Olivia to take Richard and get out of her house. Richard arrives for his green card meeting and informs Ernesto that Kate is not coming. Ernesto feels that her absence combined with his failure at the recovery program doesn't look for him, but he wants to make the best out of the opportunity and feels they can brag about his job. Officer Lewis asks Richard why it has taken 3 years to schedule this interview. Ernesto claims they didn't get the mail, but Lewis shows them all the mails retuned with curses in Richard's handwriting. Richard claims the Dewey was also not his problem because he took painkillers after the dental surgery. Ernesto claims Richard has completed the whole recovery program, but Lewis doesn't have the completion letter for it. Cindy turns out to be an officer who has informed Lewis about Richard offering her marijuana. Since the distribution of marijuana is a felony, they decide to deport Richard. In the present, Richard apologizes to Jake, but he feels glad Ernesto arranged for this 1-hour meeting so he could explain the whole story. When his time is up, Richard assures Jake he will figure something out and come back for him. Richard starts teaching in London again about Yeats, a plain old man whose dreams are of Byzantium. Richard gets a call from a hospital about Gordon being admitted there. Richard teases Gordon about coming back to a hospital when he hates them. Gordon also jokes about loving the nurses there and asks about Jake. Gordon feels proud of what Richard has gone through and done for Jake and thinks he's a better man than him. He knows Richard was sleeping with Olivia, but everything is ruined now. Richard explains that none of them are talking to each other, and it's a big mess. Gordon remembers the sunshine, beaches, and girls in California. He wonders why it took him so long to go there. Richard is glad Gordon still came there once and saw the beauty of the place. Gordon knows he doesn't have long to live and asks Richard to seize the day and enjoy every moment. He also asks Richard to get his girl and bugger off. As Richard gets emotional, Gordon reminds him of what his epitaph has to say. When he passes away, Richard visits his memorial and smiles at the "party's over" sign. Richard continues his lectures about how important it is for Yeats to make the journey to Byzantium, the place he longs for. Richard promises Jake he will sort everything out. He learns that Olivia's book is launching next week, but Kate refuses to talk to her. Richard talks about how Yeats knew he had to defy logic and authority to make that journey. Richard reads his dad's will and laughs out. He makes a call to Ernesto to get some help. Richard pays Ernesto to get to California illegally. He asks Jake to step out on Skype and hugs him. Brian is glad to see him and hugs Richard too. He explains to Kate he used an old trick to get across the border. He assures her everything will be sorted because of Ernesto before he gets caught. He feels bad for lying to Kate, but even she agrees they both have to act like adults for Jake. He explains that he asked Olivia to not tell her and suggests she should cut her some slack. Kate agrees with him, and they are all on good terms again. Olivia thanks her agent, Tim, and Richard for her book. Richard was her inspiration for the recovering alcoholic cop who saves the day. She also thanks Kate and feels sad she couldn't be there. They all arrive at the launch, but Kate finds Olivia at the beach. They both apologize and agree to never fight like this again. Richard admits he came back because he loves Olivia and needs his son. Olivia knew he will come back and thinks it's very romantic. Richard comes to the pier to scatter Gordon's ashes and informs them how that was his last wish. They never got along, but he is glad Gordon brought him back to all the people he loves, including Brian. He spreads Gordon's ashes and hopes he enjoys paradise. Richard explains to Jake that he has a way to stay back. He claims he can marry Olivia, after which she asks him to get up and kiss her.